thank you, Jane, for the very warm welcome. And can I acknowledge you and Eva, other SASPA board members who are here this morning. I think we have Professor Sam Seller here as well. Fantastic, nice to see you here, Sam. And of course, Andrew Pierpoint, the National President. I'm glad that was you up there and not me, because it would have been exactly the same if it was me. And of course, I'd like to acknowledge the incredible Mickey O'Brien as well. He's a very, very hard act to follow. And if I had been a bit braver, I would have put my hand up when Mickey was asking what that animal was that comes out after the rain, because I just spent about 8 days on the APY lands visiting schools with a couple of my parliamentary colleagues, Susan Close and Kyan Ma, and was very fortunate. In fact, we went all the way up to the northwestern kind of extremity of the state, up to Piplajara, past a few other communities. We went to Ceduna, Scadesco, Caniba, Oak Valley, and ended up in Pip. And I managed to go out with the school kids there, out on country as part of their two-way science, which I'd heard a little bit about, but I'd never been able to actually witness before. And it was incredible. We got to go out, and there was a couple of older, more experienced Aboriginal women who came out with the young primary age kids, and we went searching for honey ants. And it was incredible. She dug a hole that she almost disappeared in by the end of the couple of hours that we were there. It was probably about that deep, and we found a whole heap of honey ants, and I got to eat those with the school children. But it was an incredible experience to see, I guess, the power of how that two-way science can work in terms of giving young Aboriginal students on the lands the cultural experiences that are so important, but then taking them back into the classroom and making the things that they have learnt from their elders actually fit with Western science. And it was, I could see the power of that. And of course, it's always, so much more powerful to see that kind of thing in person rather than just to read it in a briefing. So although we clocked up, I think, close to 4,000 kilometres on the trip, it was a really, really worthwhile experience. And I met a couple of incredibly inspirational principals up there who, of course, moved away from their local communities in places like the southeast to go up and work on the lands in these schools. And it is inspirational to see people who take on what are, of course, incredibly challenging jobs, but the leadership they have shown, the support they give to these kids makes it all worthwhile. And I've come back with a renewed sense of making sure that I do everything that I can as the Minister to encourage more people to go and do those roles, because it's not an easy thing to do. It's a big thing to ask of someone to move to somewhere like Pip, which is hours and hours from the next community, but also to see if we can do whatever is in our power to get them to stay, because we know in rural and remote communities, one of the big issues we have is staff retention. It's a really tough thing. So I just wanted to, before I get into my speech proper, acknowledge that was a really fantastic experience for me. But, the jobs that you guys in this room do are challenging every single day, but want to, I guess, pay special tribute to those in your profession who go out into, I think we actually went to Australia's most remote community, which was 8 hours from the next nearest community of any description, an 8-hour drive. So I wanted to take this opportunity today to pay special tribute to those teachers and principals who go and do that work for us. They are inspirational people. It is, it was a generous welcome by Jane, but of course, events like this with SASPA are really, really important dates on the calendar for any education minister. I wouldn't have missed it for the world. The opportunity to speak to you, I guess, set out some of the priorities for me, but get a chance to listen to you as well is one that I was never going to miss. And I had a bit of a flick through your program and some of the breakout sessions, and I can see that you're tackling all the big issues here. There's some pretty incredible stuff that you're having a go at, which is incredible. I've seen stuff on trauma-informed practice, developing student self-regulation and self-management. So you're not squibbing the big issues, that's for sure. And of course, the benefit for me as the Minister is the ideas that you come up with here informs what we, or should inform what we put into practice in the department. And one of the comments I have made since the state election is there isn't really anything about being in opposition that is better than being in government. There's an old saying that even your worst day in government is better than your best day in opposition. But one of the things that it does do, I think, is actually really free you up as a shadow minister or a political party who's been exiled to opposition to actually go out and listen properly, not the kind of tick and flick consultation that we often fall into the trap of doing in government, where we just want to be able to say that we've spoken to the sector or we've spoken to stakeholders and that we can tick that box, but actually really genuine consultation. And the 4 years that we had between 2018 and this March to do that have proven, I think, to be really valuable in terms of the things that we committed to before the state election that we are delivering on now. And I'm not going to bore you with a political speech today reiterating the election commitments that we've made. Hopefully many of you are broadly familiar with them, and we are getting on with delivering them. But I think the feedback that I've had from both principals in the secondary and primary sectors, and also the community more broadly, has been positive about the things that we said before March that we would do if we were lucky enough to form government. The reason the feedback has been so positive, I think, since then, or relatively positive, is because we took the time to actually genuinely engage with people, and that included spending time with principals. And I can see a few faces here from the northeast of principals in the area that I represent in State Parliament who have been really integral to my own learning and understanding of your profession. And I want to thank those people as well. I'm not an educator and I don't pretend to be one. My father taught for 40 years as a secondary school teacher. My wife taught for about 5 or 6 years in the Catholic system in Victoria, but I'm not an educator, so I leave those things up to the experts. Many of you will know, though, I have Gary Costello in my office as the senior advisor, and I'm very pleased to have someone in the political office, in the minister's office, who has genuine experience in these areas. And I'm all about listening to you guys in a genuine way. So my door is always very much open to you to invite me to your school if you would like me to do that, or even just to sit down privately and have a conversation. And I've done that with a number of the faces that I can see in here, people who have helped me get a better understanding of a whole heap of things that you need to know as minister, but it can sometimes be a bit fraught getting that understanding solely from a briefing which is provided to you by the Education Department. And I don't mean that as disrespectful to the department, because of course its ranks are filled with people who were teachers and principals as well, but I know that nothing beats actually getting out into the field and having a genuine and frank conversation with you guys about the challenges that you're facing. And I know you are facing challenges. Your jobs, it's always risky as a politician to compare your job to anyone else's, because no one's ever going to feel sorry for a politician, and nor should they. But I think the one kind of thing that I would say strikes me as similar between your roles and mine is that every day is different. You don't know what's going to come your way. That's the thing that kind of keeps me awake at night. I know it keeps you awake at night as well. I sort of sit there sometimes gripping my mobile phone, waiting for the next incident management division email to come through, and just hoping that it's not too serious. And I've had conversations with some people in this room too who have had unfortunate incidents at their school, and I've tried to make an effort to give a personal call to you to say, listen, we do get these things. They do go to the minister. I do take it seriously. It does worry me, and we do want to put support around you, because I think if the general public actually got to receive those emails and those notifications, they would have a much better and clearer understanding of the complexity of your roles and the kind of stuff that gets thrown your way. It is full on. It is really full on. What we ask you guys to do now, I think more than ever before, is super challenging. And the insight that my dad shared with me at the end of his career, which I think was about 2012, and because he'd done 40 years, people would always say, what have you noticed that changed in the education system in your years, Ivan? And the observation he said, he always stayed in the classroom, because he said that was the calling he had, was to be in the classroom. He stayed in the classroom. But the observation he always made was, when he started his career in about 1970 or so, if he was to speak to a parent about concerning behaviour of their child, they would most likely say, thanks, Mr. Boyer, we'll have a chat to our child and we'll make sure that doesn't happen again. Whereas at the end of his career, the conversation was more likely to be, well, that's because you're the problem, Mr. Boyer, and you're victimising my child and it's all your fault. And he found by the end of his career, he was spending far more of his time managing behaviour in the classroom than teaching, and there wasn't the same kind of buy-in and sense of responsibility and it's a generalisation, I know, but buy-in and sense of responsibility from the parents to actually be a part of the solution as well. And, that's 10 years ago that he stopped, and I think that complexity has grown even in those 10 years in terms of what you guys had to deal with, and then you've got to chuck on top of that, you've had a global pandemic for 2.5 years, which is still going. I mean, no one could have predicted that. And politicians and ministers in ivory towers get to go out and say, these are the restrictions that we're putting in place this week. You have to wear a mask, or you have to have a vaccination to continue doing your job, and then we largely walk away from that press conference. And then the accountability for the decisions that we have just made often rests with you in this room. Who are the people who have to explain to angry parents about why the restrictions are what they are, about why parents can't come along to the school grounds like they used to be able to do, about why their child has to wear a mask, or about why someone needs to be vaccinated. So I just want to acknowledge that on top of all you've had to do in the classroom to make sure that our kids could actually get a world-class education while a global pandemic raged around us, you've also been the ones out in the field who've had to explain and justify the decisions of government and the decisions that we have to make. And that's a bloody hard job, because every now and then as an MP, of course, we get those very angry people too. And I've seen them at the school gate as well, and I've seen principals have to cop it. So thank you for all you've done, I guess, to stand with us throughout the last 2.5 years to make sure that the excellent education we offer in South Australia has been able to continue, and that we've been able to keep people safe as well. I have always really valued my relationships over many years with professional associations like this one. As I said before, it's been a really key part of me understanding your role. A lot of the learning that I've done is through conversations with people like Eva and Jane and many other people in here, and past office bearers of SASPA. And I've always come away from those meetings, inspired and hopeful about the future of education. It's always, I've always admired the fact that the interactions and conversations I've had with SASPA don't get sort of mired down in the kind of day-to-day grind of the jobs you have to do in the education system, but you guys are always sort of looking to the future and a few steps ahead, which is incredible that you manage to keep your eyes on the horizon, given what you have to deal with in your schools every day, which so often can take you away from the big picture stuff. The challenge as a politician for me is being able to keep up with you guys, because you are always, and I guess it's kind of a intrinsic part of being a teacher and an educator, is always looking to the future and the next step, and trying to make sure what we are offering is right for the next cohort or intake of students. But as a father of three primary age kids, I can tell you that it makes me feel really reassured and confident about the education that our kids are getting in South Australia, that we have these fantastic leaders who are not only managing big sites and lots of staff and lots of kids and global pandemics, but you also haven't taken your eye off where our system and education needs to go in South Australia to make sure it keeps up with the pace of change in the world, which is, I think, faster than it has ever been. And I do feel a real sense of pride and honour that I do get the chance to work with you now as the Minister and actually put in place things to help you in your roles, instead of being a shadow minister who gets to float ideas which sort of disappear off into the ether and perhaps never actually take hold. But now as a minister, I am looking forward to the chance to turning some of the ideas that you impart onto me into real policy. And I am a very big believer in public education. I went to public schools all the way through. My dad taught at public schools for 40 years, and my 3 daughters go to a public primary school in the seat that I represent, and I'm very proud to have them there, and I'm proud to tell people that at every opportunity, because I do believe in its power. I believe that strong public education is at the heart and the core of a really healthy society. Public schools in many ways are the glue which hold us all together, and they are also, or should be, the backstop for when our young people might come from a home life which is dysfunctional or not as happy or supportive as ideally it would be, that they have public education which is affordable and accessible and high quality that can lift them up. And that's a huge task that we give you guys. And we often hear that the single biggest impact on a child's educational outcomes is the quality of the teaching that they receive. And that's no real surprise, but what's missing from that equation, I think, is that quality teaching can't exist without the support, expertise, and expectations of quality leadership as well. And these things go hand in hand. As leaders, you have the ability to develop and expand the capabilities of your teaching workforce. The good work that goes on in our schools wouldn't be possible without you there to lead it, and we place a lot of responsibility and trust in you to do that. And one of the key characteristics of a successful leader is, of course, the culture that they instill in their school. And the observation that I have made over the many years I've been visiting schools in different capacities is you can tell often from entering the gate and meeting with the leader about what the culture of that school is going to be. And I have seen schools that perhaps were struggling in terms of enrolments, perhaps were struggling in terms of the reputation that they had in the community, and some of these schools are in the area that I represent that have been turned around in a short number of years because of a change of principle. And it's an incredible thing to see that a school with as many as, let's say, 1,000 or 1,200 students could be turned around basically by the leadership of one person. It shows, I think, the importance of the role of principal, but also the power that a principal has in terms of shaping a school community. And I think the student-centred part of that needs to be more central to the public discussion about education as well. You might have heard me talking a bit since I became Minister about the importance of bringing wellbeing into the picture and at the centre of the conversations that we have about what constitutes success in our schools and success more broadly in our education system. And of course, I've been careful to say, as the Minister for Education, I do want to see our NAPLAN scores improve. I do want to see our PISA scores improve. Nothing that I'm about to say should be taken as in any way resiling from this government's desire to see us move up those tables. But I'm also very keenly aware that if we are just talking about the academic success, if we are only talking about NAPLAN scores and PISA scores, we're missing half of the story. And we all know that over the last 2.5 years, I think collectively more than any time before, the mental health of our students and our workforce has taken a real beating. I must say I am concerned. We know that we're dealing with issues of teacher shortages across the country now, and we are seeing, I think, a huge level of fatigue amongst our leaders and our teaching workforce and our support staff as well, because they have been through so much and this pandemic just seems to drag on and drag on. And at the same time, we are trying to encourage more people to take teaching on. So I know that if we want to see those NAPLAN results and those PISA results go like this, it is completely unrealistic for us to have that expectation while the collective mental health of the teaching and leading workforce and students who are undertaking those tests is going like this. I mean, poor mental health is so prevalent in our society today, and the stories that I am regularly told about primary age kids with, suffering from things like suicidal ideation at 8 years of age really rocks you to the core. And as Minister, I guess, helped me to understand the gravity of the situation that we are dealing with. But I know many people in this room will have had their own experiences with a bit of poor mental health. I've had a few bouts of anxiety over my years, and I know what it's like when that happens. And for us to expect young people who might be dealing with those kind of issues to go and knock a NAPLAN test out of the park is just unrealistic. So I just want to be talking whenever we do, and the media will always focus on these things, that's not going to change. Whenever we're talking about success in things like NAPLAN, success in things like PISA, we are also talking about wellbeing as part of the same conversation, and not just the wellbeing of students, but also the wellbeing of teachers and leaders as well. Because if we want you guys to stay doing what you're doing, if we want to attract new people to do your roles, we're going to have to support you to stay and make sure there is supports wrapped around the next generation of principals to do your job as well. Gary Costello, who many of you will know, who is in my office, has been in my ear on many occasions since I've taken this role, talking about Maslow's hierarchy, which some of you, I'm sure, will be aware of. And I think, in terms of this conversation that I want to have about well-being and its effect on academic achievement is still pretty powerful, even though it was, I think, first sort of raised by Maslow in 1943, which I understand is when Gary started his teaching career. But it tells us that we never reach that self-actualising stage where the deep learning occurs unless we feel safe, valued and connected to other people. And that message is exactly the same: safe, valued and connected to people. I think the importance of that is more pronounced now, 80 years on, than it even was in 1943. And we need to get that back into the conversation that we are having publicly, because it's always going to be an easy target for the media to grab NAPLAN schools and PISA schools and use those as what they will perceive to be the only measure of the quality of what you're doing in your schools and the only measure of the success of your students. And we know that that is not true. The only way to counter that, though, is to talk about what we are doing in terms of well-being. Now, the challenge, of course, in that is that we have these accepted, quite established now measures of academic success. Whether you support them or you don't support them is irrelevant. They are there and they are not going anywhere. We have NAPLAN, and I guess we have, to a lesser known extent in the public, PISA. Now, the public and the media accept those as being the measure of what we are doing in our schools. But what do we have as the accepted measure of well-being? That's the challenge. For me as a politician, for me as the Education Minister, is when I want to have this conversation around academic success and how it might be informed by the collective well-being of our students and our leaders, what is the measure of well-being that we can actually use to put up against those academic measures of success? And I had a recent meeting with the Australian Educational Research Organisation, and I indicated that I would very much like them to help us develop some evidence-based indicators of well-being. Something that we can use in that conversation when the journalist inevitably asks the question, when the minister says, well, I think our academic scores in this year may not be what the expectation was, because after 2.5 years of a global pandemic with never before seen levels of disruption to the education system, that people's well-being wasn't where it was. And the journalist's next obvious question will be, well, where does well-being sit in our system, Minister? And that's where we need something to say. And I'm hoping that Aero will work with us on developing some evidence-based indicators of well-being that we can all collectively use, and something that we can use to track and invest in. And having those conversations, it's important that we listen, of course, directly to students themselves. We need to be generally engaging with students about how they're faring, what's happening in their schools, and how they feel about coming to school. And I've learned as a politician, genuine engagement won't always tell you what you want to hear. And sometimes we are far too fearful, particularly as politicians and ministers, of genuinely engaging and consulting, because we're afraid that what we're going to hear doesn't align with our own values or expectations or our own plans. And I know of schools where genuine student voice has been the start of major reforms to how their school operated, where it helped their school grow to be a place where kids wanted to learn and kids wanted to succeed. Too often education can be a postcode lottery. But I don't want to see where you live. I don't want to see where your parents or your parents' income dictate the quality of education that you receive. They are the issues that inspired me to get into politics. They are the issues right there in that last sentence I read that inspired me to join the political party of which I am a member now when I was 16 years of age, growing up in a country area, going to public schools, seeing the haves and have-nots, every now and then going to debating competitions where we were up against some of the more prestigious Geelong schools, and seeing the huge gulf, I guess, between the resources and support that we had at Portland Secondary College compared to what was being offered at other schools. That's what motivated me to get into politics, and that's why I still feel myself so incredibly lucky and still pinch myself most days that I actually get a chance to be an education minister and do something about it. This is one of the biggest things public education has to offer. Like the theme of your conference references, public education can lift young people out of their circumstances and allow them to achieve their best, regardless of their background, regardless of where they live, regardless of their parents' income. But in order for our public education system to do this most effectively, We need to ensure that we address issues of equity. We know that young people from vulnerable parts of our community, for instance those who might be under guardianship or with disability, are significantly less likely to finish their schooling or to go on to further education. We have the capacity to address this, and we must address this. Equity is not just about funding though. Although I must say, if there was a money tree at the Department of Education, I'd be incredibly happy about that, because every place I go I see another opportunity for us to invest and help schools. But it's also about tailoring our support to the specific needs of kids, teachers and leaders to help get those positive outcomes. I was at a school this week with a disability unit. Rather than keeping their disability unit separate from the mainstream classes, the special classes are interspersed throughout their school. And some of their students from the special classes will join mainstream classes for individual subjects that they might have a particular interest or aptitude for. This adjustment in how they approach the students in their special classes has helped decrease behavioural issues and increase the academic achievement of those kids. And to me, that's a great example of tailoring support to improve outcomes. But of course, my role as Minister and my department's role is to help facilitate schools who want to do that, to give you the support to be able to do it, to not just expect you to come up with all these innovations on your own, on top of all the things you're dealing with day to day. So I was really pleased to be able to see that, and I hope that we can actually do a bit more to support other schools who want to move in that direction. But in my short time as Minister, what's very clear is one of the great strengths of our education professionals and our principals is how you support not only the kids in your schools, but how you support teachers and how you support each other. This year, when some of our schools ran into difficulties and in some cases have received some very undeserved attention, from the phone calls I've had, it's clear that you guys have got each other's backs, and that's really commendable. I've loved having those conversations with principals who tell me they've been in touch with other principals just to lend a hand or offer support if they're the ones in the gun that day. And I know when you've got the newspaper after you on something, and you've got community members, for instance, potentially asking questions about what's in the news or what's in the newspaper or what's on radio, it is a horrible position to be in. But I love to know that you guys are looking out for each other as well, and there was a real sense of comradeship amongst our leaders. I want to make more use of this network of experienced leaders. We need to work with SASPA and our leaders to implement all of the government's education initiatives so that we do it well and adjust course when we are needed to. We need to work with you to understand the further challenges and opportunities we need to consider and the policy changes to tackle them. I'm strongly committed to leadership in our schools, and the Principals Associations are a vital part of how we understand what leaders are noticing, the challenges they're facing, and the successes that they are experiencing as well. I will listen to you. I will always be available to you. I will always be happy to come to your schools if you would like me to do that. I will always be available to have a private one-on-one conversation with you if you would prefer that as well. And one of the key pieces of work I want the Education Department to do about the purposes and the values of our public education system. I'll talk more about this on Leaders' Day, which I'm very pleased to be attending, but I'm keen to listen to your input in the coming months about how we actually do that. And I'm very excited about the intent of this conference and the dedication and time you're putting into coming together and discussing these ideas. You've got a great lineup of speakers and some cutting-edge breakout sessions as well. And as I saw before, it was really pleasing as the Minister to see your breakout sessions are dealing with the really big and challenging issues that we have in the sector. I really hope you enjoy this conference. I hope it's an opportunity for you all to connect with each other again, offer a bit of support to those in the room who've been doing it tough for various reasons at their school. I really do hope I get the opportunity to come and visit your sites over the next few years as the Minister for Education, and I do really encourage you to take me up on my offer of having a chat to you one-on-one if you would like. I don't need to have advisors with me, or I don't need to have representatives from the Education Department. I want to hear the unfiltered truth from you guys around what you think is working, what isn't working, and what I can do as the Minister to improve things. So it's lovely to be here with you all this morning. Could I just finish again by thanking you for what you do, but most importantly, what you've done over the last 2.5 years. I can tell you the South Australian public is grateful, and we are very, very lucky to have such dedicated people as the leaders of our schools. Thank you.